Welcome to Mr. President and Mr. Speaker. We're in the well of the Florida House of Representatives. Mr. Speaker, thanks for having us.
Thank you. Welcome again to the Florida House, Steve.
Okay, I'll start with you. Are we going to get out on time? Everybody's speculating about that. They're also wondering if we're going to get out early.
Well, I'll just say this. Number one, I think we're further down the road here on near the beginning of week 6 than any session since I got here in 2004. One of the things that President Haridopolos and I tried to do was hit the ground running back in November. I don't think any legislature has ever done a special session the day they convened, or if they had, not in my memory. And we're here to try and address the tough problems. These are difficult times from a budget perspective, from a policy perspective. Unemployment is probably the number one thing we're trying to work on. So I think it's too soon to tell whether we finish early, but I think we're certainly well down the road for being week 6.
Week 6, okay. Mr. President, how about you? Your perspective on getting out on time?
I think they're doing very well. I think the Speaker's right on target. I think we are ahead of schedule. This is my 11th session. I think we're well ahead of schedule, but there's a long way to go. I know we've been talking a lot about budget cuts, and they're substantial, nearly $4 billion. Both the House and Senate not only passed their budgets off, but without a tax increase. And I think the other thing that's equally important is the reform measures that we're both pushing through. Pension reform, education reform already done, and of course the idea of Medicaid reform. So this isn't just about cutting budgets, it's about reforming long-term so that Florida can grow in the future.
You mentioned, Mr. Speaker, allocations. Tell the people who are viewing this what budget allocations are. I know people are really going to be interested in those. Mr. President, we'll start with you.
Well, Dean is more experienced than I in allocations, but all we're trying to do is line up the different silos within the budget. Obviously K through 12, higher ed, health and human services, Medicaid primarily, transportation, and also what are called administered funds, meaning the pension and health care benefits for state workers. Those are all in the mix, and we're just working on those as we speak. We'd like to get started with conference soon, and I think we're well on our way.
What signals will your allocations send out about your priorities, Mr. Speaker?
Well, I think it's important to know that the House and the Senate each pass their version of a General Appropriations Act. We passed that out Thursday of week 5. And I think the House budget was around $66.5 billion. The Senate had a budget almost $70 billion. We've got to line up what the differences are, and then obviously then direct Chair Alexander in the Senate and Chair Grimsley in the House to then establish those priorities in those policy areas that Mike mentioned. So once you set that, then of course all the conferees go to work and try and line up the differences, and it's a healthy part of our process that the House and the Senate are different compositionally, and they bring different approaches to the budget. The beauty of our system is we're a check on each other because we have to work together. Ultimately, the bill that passes has to pass from both the House and the Senate. But again, we've had a great working relationship, and I'm pretty optimistic that process will go smoothly.
So you're still friends?
Absolutely. Here in week 6, absolutely, yeah.
Well, here week 6, okay. Let's talk about the role that each of you will play in the budget process. I know in the end game, you will play a very significant role because the differences will have to be resolved somehow. But Mr. President, other than the allocation and the appointment of conferees, what else will you two be doing as the budget process unfolds?
Well, I think as the Speaker mentioned already, that a lot of the hard work or heavy lifting has been done. By having that North Star approach, meaning no new taxes, it really focused our members to make the tough calls. Again, we're going to reduce almost $4 billion out of our budget, and I'm very optimistic we'll get out here on time. That's our goal. But our goal is to make sure that kind of the trains run on time. There's going to be some different policy points where we simply don't agree. And we're going to have to work out a compromise. That's what this whole process is about. And I'm very, very confident, given our relationship, the relationships that the chairman also hold as appropriations, both Chairman Grimsley here in the House and, of course, Chairman Alexander in the Senate. We'll get it done at the end of the day, but we want to give it as much as possible a member-driven process. That's how the different bills passed off the floor, both the House and the Senate. And I think we'll come to a thoughtful agreement. Now, we're going to disagree. That's only logical. We're different folks. But I think we'll come to a logical conclusion at the end.
How about you, Mr. Speaker? What's your view about the most important priorities you have in the budgeting process?
The approach we've tried to take in the House, and Chair Grimsley's done a fantastic job of this, is in a year where you've got to make cuts, try as best you can to emphasize people over things and essentials over non-essentials. Take an example like K-12. Classroom instruction is both the essential thing and it's where the people are. It's our school children. So try and prioritize dollars there. We've got capital construction. There are other non-instructional things that are important, but they're not as important as preserving as many dollars as we can in the classroom. In the healthcare context, there is the medically needy program where people are truly profoundly ill and need help. There are also programs such as these healthy lifestyle programs that say, hey, you shouldn't be obese and you shouldn't smoke. Look, it's 2011. If you don't know that smoking is bad for you by now, it's probably a little late. So focus on the essentials, like getting the health care to the truly sick, versus the good, maybe a lifestyle program that is important. But in a year like this, hey, maybe we have to cut good programs to fund the essential programs. You're
speaking using the word essential. Governor Scott has said it's essential that there be tax cuts. Each of you have said you love tax cuts, but maybe not this year. What will be his reaction, do you think, if there are no tax cuts in this budget, Mr. President?
Well, first, I think we put it in the planning conference. There could be some tax relief, looking at property tax relief, maybe some research and development tax relief. The school tax holiday, I know, is on the wish list as well. But we're doing first, unlike in Washington, is we're making the tough cuts first, meaning the actual reductions in spending, which has been a long problem for Republicans and Democrats alike. I was so impressed with the way the House handled their bill. They had some tough calls to make in education and health care, and they made the cuts. And I think, as the Speaker said, they prioritized people over things. And I think that's to be applauded. And again, I expect us to work out those differences. I hope to have some tax relief within there, but our first focus from both the Speaker and I has been make the difficult spending cuts first, then see what kind of leftover where we can offer some incentives to grow jobs. It's not just about cutting taxes, but how can this have a long-term effect to create new jobs given our unemployment rate currently. So, Mr. Speaker, you think there is room or could be at some point in time for tax cuts?
Absolutely. Now, whether it's exactly, the governor made a big priority of the corporate income tax cut. Frankly, of all the Florida CEOs I've spoken to, not one of them has actually asked for the corporate income tax cut. They've asked for things like property tax relief, regulatory relief, the kind of targeted programs like Mike just mentioned, where we can maybe attract capital that is leaving other states with higher tax regimes and coming here. So I think what's good is the President and I share the governor's goal of attracting businesses to Florida, making us the most business-friendly state in the union, living within our means, and fighting taxation, regulation, and litigation. What that looks like, he is the executive branch, and his job is to sort of execute. We are the appropriating branch, and our job is to come up with a budget that works. So, and one of the things that I got to say about the governor is he has been extremely good to work with. He's not afraid to get into the policy details of something, and has been very reasonable. Where we have disagreed, he's been extraordinarily reasonable in talking through issues like that. So I'm confident we'll work it out in the end of the day.
I was going to ask you, you kind of beat me to it, but I was going to ask you about your working relationship with the governor and his staff. Are you in regular conversation with him, Mr. President?
We are. And again, what's so, I think, impressive about his tenure thus far, not everyone's agreed with it, obviously, but he said he was going to govern as a conservative and he's going to run the government more like a business. He's done exactly that and made some very difficult calls. Again, the alternative would be a massive tax increase to make up this shortfall. I think he's been very hands-on. A lot of the members have said that they've had one-on-one discussions with him either at the mansion or in his office, or he's even taken time, I believe, last week to testify before the House. I think that's very impressive. He is well-versed on policy matters. This is his first year in elected office, and we are a team. At the end of the day, the way that we're going to invite folks to do business here is if they feel like there's stability, there's predictability, there's certainty in the state of Florida, and I think he's done a very good job of that.
Would you believe that there are people around this Capitol walking around saying, if he doesn't get tax cuts, he's going to veto the budget, or he's going to line item veto enough to have tax cuts? Have you heard that?
I've heard that rumor once or twice, and I hear it every year for 11 years. So it's, it's a give and take process. And to his credit, he's engaged us both, more importantly, entire memberships of both the House and the Senate. And we're going to work things out because it's in the best interest of growing jobs in the economy.
All right, on that note, jobs, jobs, jobs. You see it in every poll that is the #1 concern of Floridians. And we still have, an incredible unemployment rate in the state. What are some specific pieces of legislation, either one of you, that you think will help to drive job creation? Either one.
I'll just pick on two and then pitch it over to Mike. The first thing we did was deal with the unemployment compensation tax, basically protects small businesses from a tax increase coming from the federal government on the unemployment compensation tax. that's a job killer. You know, the first thing you do when you're in a storm is do no harm and prevent further damage. Literally, the first bill we took up first week was to address that issue. In the House, I'm proud of the work that we did on our deregulation bill. You know, the thing that the governor said, the three enemies of a healthy economy, taxation, regulation, and litigation, we're trying to move the ball on all three. Specifically in the regulatory context, you know, deregulate those industries where maybe the government's regulation of something isn't really preventing a harm, but it's costing time and money and frankly frustrating the deployment of capital. So it's that sort of thing.
What did you deregulate in that bill?
Well, there was a whole slew of them. Chair Bovo, Stevie Bovo from Miami, did a process where they looked at, have there been complaints? What things were contained? It included everything from hair braiders and wrappers to interior designers. If you'd have told me week one that we would have spent an hour and a half in floor debate over whether to deregulate interior designers, I never would have believed it, but it happened. And I think sometimes people have the notion that if government regulates something, that will somehow prevent all sorts of evil, and that maybe it isn't intended to actually just prevent competition. We believe in free market capitalism. The best folks will do well in interior design, and the worst folks won't. That sort of thing.
Mr. President, we've got about a minute left in the segment. Your thoughts about job creation?
Again, I applaud what the House has done on both those issues, and I think they're going to be moving in the right direction. But beyond that, I think the number one thing we can offer, which has not been offered for years, is stability. Again, I think the agenda we're moving towards, when you know that taxes are not going to go up, when you know the ability for a lawsuit to happen is actually decreased, when you know that the regulatory environment is more friendly towards people trying to start a business, you're going to attract folks here. And at the end of the day, we're in competition with other major states like California, Texas, New York. Those states are big time underwater. Texas even has a $13.5 billion shortfall, 27 over 2 years. California, $25 billion shortfall. So we're offering, which has not been offered for the last few years, a lot more stability. And I think that kind of stability will attract beyond what the speaker spoke about.
Thank you. We'll be right back.